Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Costa from People Insight. I'm delighted to have you with myself and everyone else who's joining to learn a bit more about best practice, what good looks like, and some real life examples from an organization we've been working with for a few years now. So we'll hear from Will in a second. Just a quick update of the agenda today, what the session will look like. So you'll have myself doing a bit of talking and Will, who of course we'll be hearing from to learn much more around good practice within organizations, especially around a topic that I know we are all very familiar with. So we're going to talk about belief in action. That's what today is about. It's a question that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. We'll get into some detail around that, what we've been seeing around that when it comes to trends, and why is it important? What's the big deal about this question? Why does it matter if people believe or don't believe anything's going to happen as a result of their input and opinion? So I'll be talking to Will. I'll be asking some questions. I know, Will, there's some questions we've already run by you. You've got some great responses. There's a couple I haven't run by you, so I might actually interject with them because I do think it's important. They came to me just recently, and also know we've got some questions towards the end from our audience members to hear a bit more about some of the challenges they are facing. So just a very brief moment just to share a bit about People Insight and who we are. We are a fairly small organization. When I first joined 9 years ago, we were, I think, roughly 6-7 people. We've grown tremendously since then. Big part of who we are at People Insight is about working closely with our partners, enabling them to use survey data to create incredible places to work, which of course we know leads to several positive outcomes, which we're all familiar with. Our platform is a really big part of us. It's there to make sure, rather than having an exhaustive task of analyzing and gathering insight and trying to read data, but simplifying things and making it very intuitive in terms of the experience for yourselves in identifying what the right thing is to focus on, gathering the right insights, be it at high level, but also across an organization, and making sure you can get something very specific and goal focused around that when it comes to actions. A lot has changed since I first started. So if we go back 9 years ago, everything's growing. We are bigger, more partnerships, fantastic partnerships. A new office, we have constantly evolving technology. However, our people, the focus on relationships, how we bring in our expertise, that remains very strong, remains as it was when I first started. And that's a big part of who we are. It's getting the platform right, so great technology, but combining it with that people element in not just how we work with you, but the expertise we provide in how we support you in terms of communication, managing a project, and so on. All focus and aim towards that final point of what do you get out from that survey? How do you make it very action focused rather than that tick box exercise experience we do not want employees to, of course, feel. We're very fortunate we get to work with a ton of great organizations and clients and partnerships from different sectors, public, not-for-profit, private, small, big, UK-based across the globe, each aspiring to, of course, have a great workplace culture. Not just great names, but also the people we work with. Very fortunate in that case as well. We have some great partnerships, the actual people we work with. So you'll hear from Will in a second, of course, but every individual is aspiring for something very similar, which is how do we create that awesome place to work that we know is going to lead to a very positive impact for the organization, be it from a business point of view or performance and so on. Now, as I said, belief in action is our key focus on today. It's a question I'm sure lots of you here are very familiar with. I believe action will take place as a result of this survey. It's how we would ask it in our Pearl methodology, but there are, of course, varieties in that question. Over the years, normally we've seen that belief in action question score lands around 50% favorable. So how people respond is typically around 50% agree or strongly agree. We saw quite a little spike back in 2021 that might relate to some of the increase in communication and engagement and dialogue we saw from leaders and others when it was the lockdown period, but that has now dropped back down to that 50% mark, and it is sometimes very difficult and challenging to move. And we know there's a frustration there. Sometimes we have worked with organizations in the past who have done some tremendous stuff, but we don't see a shift there. So we want to learn, of course, well, what does make that move? What can bring that back up? And also, it's not just about moving it back up. What does that lead to? So it remains a fundamental question, and there's good reason for that. And these graphs probably tell you quite a bit about the importance of that belief in action question. So we know this from our data. So we have, of course, hundreds of surveys we run in a year, which means we have that opportunity to look at our results in the data at an overall level and see what information we can get from it. So the first to touch on is on that left-hand side. So how positively belief in action correlates with engagement. You can see as belief in action goes up, we often see that go up in engagement. And that graph says it all. Put it in perspective, if I think of the last few months, because that's as more fresh in my mind, probably 80 or 90% of the feedback presentations I have delivered, belief in action has been amongst the top 5 key drivers of engagement. So it appears there frequently. Second graph, you can see there, when belief in action goes up, response rate goes up. And I think that makes sense, and it's fairly common sense, really, that if people believe something's going to happen as a result of the survey or have seen action as a result of their input or their colleagues' input, their opinions, their feedback, expression of ideas, if they've seen action around that, they're more likely to take part in action in the survey again, sorry. So when we hear the question, what can I do to increase response rate? The number one response is always act on the previous listening program you had in place, be it a survey, focus group, one-to-one, 360, whatever they are, make sure you act on them. That's what generates the confidence. Apologies. There we go. Oh, apologies, my slide just keeps on skipping. Bear with me. I'm going to try this one more time, and if it doesn't work, I'm just going to talk through and pause. There we go. It's gone. Apologies for that. So if we look at how to build buy-in and belief, there is a structure and a purpose when following that. And there is best practice around that. I think every organization is going to be different in how you take action forward, but there are some basics, I would say, that should be practiced and followed. So how do you record actions? How do you move them from one step, from like not started, into progress and seeing how they got completed is essential. And some of the examples I'm sharing here with you actually from our client who will be speaking this afternoon. It's about making sure you've got the right comms in place as well. So before the survey goes live, how do you talk about it? What do you talk about? What do you commit to? Do you touch on the things you might be doing afterwards, or what the plan is after that survey as well? When it's live, tendency we might sometimes see when the survey is live, we're all relaxed, we got it out finally, it was all successful, great, and then the comms might die off. And what we want to be doing is, of course, making sure we're on top of that and still talking about the survey, not just through automated reminders, but managers talking to their teams, leaders talking about the survey that's currently out there. And of course, when the survey finishes and closes, how quick are we to talk about it? How quick are we to share some high-level results, be it the response rate, be it the engagement score, or some other factors? And then how do we continue to talk about it beyond there as well? Again, a common pitfall we might see sometimes is after the survey finishes, we did a presentation. Often we do an all-staff presentation, which is great for that third bullet point around immediate post-survey communication. But 6 months down the line, when we get busy, external factors take place, other important factors to consider, we forget and the communication starts to dial down. And then the next survey is coming up and we're quickly back on it to talk about, hey, you said we did. So it's how do we ensure we've got a nice sustained momentum throughout? Enstar is a prime example in how this can be done really well, and just presenting some numbers there for you. So if you look at the 2022 scores, belief in action, response rate, and the engagement score, very positive as they were. In fact, the engagement score even jumped from the previous survey, which we don't have here. So I know there's been upward trend over those few years, 88%, of course, in our top quartile benchmark. And if you look at their most recent survey, how belief in action had jumped and how response rate have jumped. And I remember discussing with the leaders at 2022, when presenting this, talk about the results is when you do achieve those high percentages, like 67% in belief in action. Sometimes there's a challenge in just maintaining that number, let alone going up. But we have seen with Enstar, of course, it's gone up even further with 5 points. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to our partner, Will, who we've been working with, and of course, Enstar, just to hear from yourselves. This is the organization you've been working with, and some great stuff have been done. So please enlighten us and share.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you for the introduction and for sharing our results. I've only recently joined Enstar, so I can't take any of the credit at all. Yeah, very happy to support you. And for those who are in the process of considering whether to use Costa and the team, I can only say I wholeheartedly recommend the team to you. You know, Costa is a great partner. In previous organizations, I've sometimes been sort of questioning whether we should bring the consultant in to come and partner closely with us, particularly when presenting to the senior team. And, you know, Costa has been a key part of that, and really getting our senior team engaged around the survey is super credible and has done a fantastic job. So I don't want to present today with a sense that we've driven all of this change internally. You know, I think People Insights have done a great job in helping us along the way.
Just for everyone's attention, that's not part of the script, by the way. So we'll be delighted to hear that, of course. So thank you for sharing that. Well,
you know, I just wanted to turn the table back onto you as well. So, yeah, so I'm Will Roberts. In terms of my career, I started off in the military for a number of years, then moved into consulting, and I've been in HR roles for the last 18 years. I work for Enstar Group, so we're a global insurance group, and we are market leaders in acquiring and managing run-off liabilities. We've got approximately 800 staff who are predominantly located in the UK, across Europe, and in the US as well.
Perfect. So we'll start us off by telling us a bit about the journey you've seen. I know you've recently joined Enstar as well, but you've had a bit of background in learning from others what's been done. But what it's been like in terms of the employee experience journey for Enstar over the last few years?
Yeah, so we're in a maturing state. We've gone from being a startup business only 30 years ago and progressively grown and increased the size of the teams. And there's been particular growth just in the last 5 years. And the organization about 4 to 5 years ago was of a size where it made sense to start the survey. And my predecessor, you know, partnered with Costa and the team to get an initial survey going back in 2020. And if we could push it on to the next slide, or I'm happy to take control, whatever's easier. But I think this just sort of brings that to life, that we started off just looking at diversity and inclusion. That was a key theme for the organization back in 2020. You know, they've recently launched a diversity and inclusion action group that was really driving some change, and they wanted to conduct a survey that really focused in on those questions. That went very well, and you know, through 2021 through to the last survey that we ran at the end of 2023, we've been seeking the support and alignment of the business to really just increase the survey. And we've added additional sections on engagement, on the HR support being provided, whether that's learning, benefits, reward, and then we've added a section on communications and management.
So with some of the sections you just touched on, and I remember when we did first start, when it was just on diversity and inclusion, and we broadened out, and it was great to see some of that positivity spread across different topics as well. What were to you some of the standout elements that would drive impulse survey actions? So when you came in, especially as someone with fresh pair of eyes, if you will, what really stood out to you when it came to that pulse survey action?
Yeah, so I think there's one particular open text question that we ask around what could we do differently. You know, our particular version of that question is, what could we do differently to inspire you to do your best work? I appreciate, you know, you'll all have slightly different versions of that, but we really go deep on that. And what's interesting is the senior team are quite active in getting into the analysis and the thematics that we produce on that question. So I think when it comes to group level actions, that question is very good. But in terms of really, you know, where can HR best apply itself, it is this question around belief and action. That is our golden question. We run the analysis across all of the different functions and teams, as I'm sure most of you do, but it allows us to very quickly identify where we've got team leaders who are perhaps inundated, who haven't been able to build that belief and action relative to others within the team. And that's where we then partner with the HR business partner team, and we seek their support in going and providing a lot more hands-on support to really help that leader book the time to properly cascade the results in a consistent way, and then to again take the time to empower the team to run some local action planning. So that question is really important. I'd say just additionally, if you want to push it on to the next slide, Costa, the other thing we really do is use external research. Something that I focused on in the last year and a half that I've been here is really helping the leaders to appreciate the commercial benefits. I think they were all engaged and they appreciated the success that the organisation had with the survey, but they didn't necessarily truly buy into what this could achieve for them and their teams in terms of commercial results. So we spent quite a lot of time looking at external research and then looking at our own internal metrics to really try and prove out that point that the engagement survey is going to have a huge number of side effects that are hugely positive for the organisation as well. And this just gives you an example of the sort of literature that we've used.
Well, if I can ask, with that convincing and demonstrating the importance of it, do you find once that's been done and you have the buy-in, is that a repeated process? Is that something you and the wider, let's say, HR team or comms team have to keep on top of to keep the leaders engaged? And what's the buy-in process from your side?
Yeah, I don't think it's a criticism of the leaders and that it's a bad thing that we have to keep repeating it. I think they've got 100 different things coming across their desks each month, and we're very invested in the engagement survey. It's one of the critical things for HR teams, but for the senior leadership team, I'm sure once they've got the actions agreed and they know local activity is underway, I'm sure their spotlight shifts elsewhere. So absolutely, it's really for that reason that we just accept that there will be this 6-month lag, having gone through that quick cycle of cascading the results, getting the actions done. It's another 6 months before we run our annual survey again. We absolutely sort of repeat that process and try and get people as excited as we can and engaged as we can. But we wait until that month before, appreciating they've got heaps of other things to focus on. Yeah.
So Will, I know there are lots of people online here who are eager to hear, well, what did you do? What did Enstar do as a result of the survey? What specifically, as in specific, tangible, visible actions that Enstar did with the results that came out of the survey? So please share some of those things that you and the wider team did.
Sure. Both at the group level and the team level, we track the actions. I mean, just firstly, at the team level, we run a SharePoint tracker. So across the 30 or so core teams, we ask them to let us know what their actions are. And then we run a thematic report and we share that report widely as well, so that everyone across the organisation can see what those themes are. And it's quite interesting for them to be able to compare and contrast what their team are working on versus others. But then at the group level, you've shared on this slide, and then there's a second slide behind it. These are just examples of the sorts of infographics and information that we share ahead of the survey. I know some people are sort of moving off the "you said, we did." The version we use is your voice, our action. So you can see there that we're just listing out what's come from the survey, what are our employees asking for, and then we're just listing out the actions that we took. And these run alongside a series of messages that the senior leadership team send out as well. And you can see here just a couple of examples. There was a lot of talk in the late 2022 survey that we could be doing a lot more on recognition. So we've launched, as an example, a really comprehensive approach to recognition. We've invested in the Nectar scheme, invested significant budgets so that managers are able to allocate recognition awards, $50 awards, to employees in their own teams and across the organisation. And that's had a fantastic response. The regional and global town halls were quite infrequent, and we've really ramped that up. The communications team have done a huge amount in terms of beefing up their approach and having a very regular cadence of town halls now, both at the regional and global level. And then finally, on wellness and D&I, we've had in-person events and webinars across a whole range of topics, but very much trying to respond to what we saw employees asking for in that late 2022 survey. And I think those three are just a number of examples, but I think they all contribute to help improve the overall engagement scores that we've seen. Yeah.
I guess, truth be told, with everything that can come out of a survey, it is, as you said when you were speaking about the leaders as well, there's 101 things to do. You're not going to be able to action everything. How do you, because of course we're talking about the positivity now in terms of the actual actions that came out of it and that were visible and communicated. Knowing that organization cannot act on everything, how do you talk about the things that actually you don't action and you can't take forward for whatever reasons? What happens with those areas and factors?
Yeah, a nice best practice that I've seen is that you talk about, the immediate things that we're able to tackle, and I'm sure others are doing this. But you talk about the quick wins. You talk about the second stage of actions, which will be those sort of short term, perhaps within a year. We're definitely going to get to and address these items, and then you have a third category that you talk about, which are items that have been highlighted, but they need significant review and they need time. They possibly need budget, and these could be items that take 2 to 3 years. So I think that's quite a nice way of just saying to the employees in your communications afterwards, look, we've heard you. Here are the significant priorities that we're seeing, but some of them we're not going to get to for a couple of years, and that can be frustrating for people sometimes. But I think it's important to be able to spell that out. I think a good example is career development. I mean, that's come up consistently. And when I first arrived, I worked with our chief people officer, and we've come up with a broader career framework project. So rather than just go out with a knee-jerk reaction to run some quick training on career development discussions, which we thought was really just a very much a sort of quick partial solution, what we've done is we delayed it, we've waited. And function by function, we're now working through and clarifying grades, titles, creating an open career framework where there's real clarity on the career options that people have, and then combining that with career development discussions. So, I think there's frustration there. There's some functions that we yet to get to. It's been almost 2 years since there was this discussion of how important it was. But I think for those that have been through the pilots that we've run, they've really appreciated that in-depth support. So I think as long as you're telling people what you're doing and when it's coming, I think that's what's most important.
I think you've hit a nail on the head there as well with good communications, because an observation is sometimes if we're not acting on something, let's not talk about it, or let's not mention it, and let's sweep it under the rug type of thing. There's nothing to update on this. Whereas what we've found is actually a bit of, be it negative communication or something that's not going to please someone, is better than trying to avoid it and creating that void, if you will, or that emptiness that doesn't land nearly as well. So it's taking that right approach. So when it comes to just moving on, Will, and thinking about how that data is translated into actions, what's the process that you take currently within Enstar? What factors come into play? How do you prioritize actions with the different ones coming from probably for different parts of Enstar as well, being a global organization? How does the prioritization take place?
Yeah, so if you want to push it on a couple of slides to slide 16, I can just provide an example. Sorry, 15 and 16. So these are just examples of the in-depth analysis we do. So clearly I'll
go back to this one, Will. Sorry. Yep.
Great. Yeah. So clearly the scores against the questions are very telling, as I'm sure everyone on the webinar uses those to, that's a very important part of the conversation. But I think being able to do a deep dive on the thematics from the open text questions is important. And something that we've done is we've shared this level of review with the senior team to really get them engaged in a review of what have we done so far and what have we got planned for next year, and is it sufficient in terms of what we're hearing. So against each, I mean, this is just an example of so we're a reasonably small company. It's pretty straightforward to review this level of comments. In my previous role, it was a much bigger company. It took 2 or 3 days longer, but fortunately, it's a small number of comments to get through. But what we do in this section is we just give a quick, brief summary of what we've seen, what are employees asking for, and then we talk about how we've rated on the respective questions, and then we talk about what we've got in plan for the following year, and we have a discussion about whether we've missed anything, whether there are gaps in our plan, and what more could we be doing. And this is just an example, but we just picked out the top sort of key theme areas you can see on these two slides, but as I'm sure is consistent with others, reward, career, how are the management team getting on, how are they communicating? Those are all, I'm sure, consistent themes for you. But we're just looking at, well, what are we actually doing? Have we got the right management development programs, prepared? Have we got this career framework rollout in plan? Are we doing it quickly enough? Do we need to throw additional external resource at that to speed that up? Those were the sorts of conversations that we've been having across the HR leadership team and with leaders. So I'd say this is something that we use, and it is very effective in really helping us to validate that we've got the right action plans in place at the group level.
How transparent are you with this, Will? So, or leaders, how transparent are they with this information, with openness around this? And also, how do you ensure there is accountability as well? So again, thinking of everything else everyone has on their plates.
Yeah.
How do you make sure this just doesn't drop?
Yeah. So I think in terms of accountability, we've been pretty clear with that. It's part of a leadership goal. There's expectations that our top leaders, as part of their leadership goal, will deliver on the employee survey actions as required. I think for the top team, it's part of their scorecard. They have to maintain engagement above a certain level. So I think, if those on the webinar aren't already doing it, I would absolutely have a conversation with the senior team about what's appropriate there. What sort of metrics can we introduce that really gets people focused on it? And as with everything, if you're able to then to link that through to end of year performance ratings and the way in which we're going to compensate people, that is very helpful. It helps sharpen the focus. But I think just in terms of the openness part of your question, I think we're very open. That the chief operating officer stood up on the group town hall and shared. All right, there was a 10-page version of the slides that we reviewed with the full senior team, but then pretty much a full deck, a full version of that was then made available by the communications team afterwards for those that wanted to review it. And then there's a full transparency, the full information, all of the key information that you provide. We slightly adapted to add some insights, but the full deck is shared in a cascade consistently across all of the 30 teams, and the HR business partner team, ensures that happens and ensures that there is a cascade meeting and a conversation.
That the town halls themselves and how it is shared does often come up as one of the best things about working at Enstar when we look at the survey results. Yeah. And from those focus groups, we know people often do say they get a lot from those town halls and they feel informed and updated, and comms it appears from what we're reading that currently, the size of the organization as well, it's something that Enstar are doing incredibly well. All very positive. Will, tell us about some of the challenges and difficulties perhaps you faced or your other colleagues have faced, and how you overcame those obstacles.
Yeah, I think in terms of the challenge, starting small is not necessarily the best option. So I appreciate that back in 2020, there were very specific reasons why they wanted to start with a small survey, but that does create problems. So if there are people on the call who are thinking about whether to start small or to partner with your team to consider a fuller survey, I would encourage you to go with the latter. Growing the survey bit by bit, year on year, does create problems because, of course, you've got to create that year on year comparison with previous years. But I would say, the key learning for our team has been, to use the expertise of Costa's team. They've been absolutely excellent in helping us interpret the questions, where we've had to slightly modify the questions to make them more appropriate for Enstar. They've been able to help us map those questions back to the source data that you've got, so that we can continue with those comparisons. But I'd say that's the learn for the organization, is that wasn't necessarily the best thing to do. And because of the way that we structured the survey in the first place, it's almost created some constraints. And I think actually, rather than just having the 4 sections we have at the moment, I would think within a couple of years we'll have most probably 6 or 7 sections. It'll be a fuller, broader survey. We've got the organizational buy-in to do that. It's just, if we were to make significant changes all in one year, it does create some slight problems in terms of maintaining that comparison. So when we're reporting up at board level, we want to make sure we've got a true comparative figure with the previous year. So yes, I think that is one slight frustration at the moment, is we'd like to jump we'd like to jump to a full survey, but we're just slightly constrained by that.
I would agree, Will, as in starting with the wider survey, more breadth, you
Yeah.
get a real understanding of what's impacting, let's say, engagement, other things within an organization.
Yes.
And if you then want to narrow down, you're starting from a stronger foundation of knowing exactly what's important to the organization, what the results show, rather than, like you say, and I do agree, starting from something smaller. I mean, it was going to be my next question. You've kind of touched on it already, just about the future of listening for yourselves at Enstar. And you, of course, you have a people insights platform, which you can do a lot with. How do you envisage the next 2 years? You mentioned widening it up, so you've got a few more themes in there. Anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, so we've really appreciated having the administration rights on the platform. We've been able to tailor the survey and administer it in the way that we want. We're also then able to interpret, as I said, we do a bit of additional interpretation of the reports at the back end, and we add some insights pages to the reports that come from your system. So I think that's something we're going to continue working on, is enhancing the look and feel of the reports. But we do want to give leaders access to the system. At the moment, it's just HR that have access to the system. And if we get a request from a leader to cut the data in a different way, to look perhaps, if they've got a global team and they want to look at a regional split of data, that's something that HR then does for them. So I think in time, we want to build the capability of the leaders to do that. I'd say maybe about 50% of the organization, when we look at the different leaders, are ready to do that and are keen to have that sort of access. And we're just trying to decide the right time to make that available for all of them. And I think that a big benefit would be that means the action planning could then be done on that same system. At the moment, we have a separate SharePoint page that they all use for their action planning. So it would make it less of a clunky process to have everything in one place. So I think that's one big solution we're pushing towards. It may be the end of this year that we switch that access on. I think the other big thing that we've done this year that's gone down very well is to really sort of try and drive a consistent approach to the employee-led action groups. This idea that it's not just on the team leaders to take the local action and for them on their own to decide what the action is, but rather the team leader, the department leader would cascade the results, and then there would be a discussion about what the priorities are. And then a team from, let's say it's a team of 30, perhaps a handful of them would get together, come up with some options, clearly would agree with the leader of the team what those critical actions are, and then that team would go off and work on the solutions to be implemented at the local level. So we've really tried to drive this year this focus that, yes, at the group level, we're very comfortable with what we're doing. The reality this year, I'd say, is there's greater focus on that team level activity. We really want to see each of the teams driving significant change. So that's our focus. We're absolutely going to continue to focus on that this year and next year. Yeah,
I think that's the right focus, and we've discussed that in the past, haven't we, over the last year? Which is, when are they ready now? Are certain managers ready now, or is there an element of providing that support, etc.? And when that happens, of course, making sure they feel fully enabled to achieve those results. You want them to feel like they can get this job done rather than feeling worried about it. We know managers are often promoted on the technical ability and not necessarily the people skills. So how do you ensure they do feel this sense of achievement that comes along with this? Will, before, I know we've got some panel questions, and I'm going to pass back to my colleague Ryan just to lead us through those. But before I do, any final tips that come to your mind for those organizations who have joined, who are really interested in how do I push this score up? It's been stuck, it's stagnated, has it moved much, or what else could we be thinking about and doing? I know you've walked us through quite a bit already, Will, so no need to repeat everything, of course, but what else comes to your mind in terms of final tips for partners and clients who have joined?
I think the top thing that I learned along the way was when I first got involved in surveying, when I first got into HR a few years back, I focused so much just on the technical piece and getting the right questions in the right order and getting the sections of the report perfect and making sure that the implementation, the administration of the survey was exemplary. And I've now appreciated that that's great, but that should really just be 10% of your focus. That should just be happening. And actually, you should spend, and HR should really be investing all of their time in the follow-up and the action planning and driving the change and really measuring the belief in action and going out. So that would be my number one tip, is just to get that balance right. Make sure you've got a strong technical team that can do the doing, but really make sure that the business partner team are really geared up to go and drive that engagement piece and follow-up piece. I think the other thing is just to try and build a network of support. When you find leaders in the organisation who are passionate about the engagement survey, just think about how you can use them in town halls and as ambassadors to really try and drive the change across the rest of the leadership group.
Thank you, Will. And before we move on to those questions, as you know, Will, but just to share with everyone, Enstar have retained a fantastic achievement over the last few years based on their response rate, on engagement, everything else they're doing. And I know, I'm sure you agree with this, Will, that everyone, leaders within the organisation as well at Enstar, are particularly proud of this. And every time we've spoken with them, the people element is there, the forefront of everything else. They acknowledge the importance of staff, and it's great to see the commitment, the dedication, the investment in this and getting it right. And also, one thing I've loved to see, I've loved watching, is just when the scores are as fantastic as they are, there's still a keenness in, well, how do we make sure we stay on top of this? How do we make sure it continues going upwards and we don't get lazy about it? And I think that's a pitfall we're all probably potentially would fall into if we see such high scores, but I know it's one we haven't seen at Enstar, so I really do hope it continues. And with your military background, William, I'm sure you can make sure that is the case for everyone over there. So Ryan, I'm going to pull you back in just for some of those panel questions, which I know you have on screen. I can...
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Costa.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm in control. And thank you, Will, for sharing your journey. Obviously, there's so much for everyone to learn, so we really do appreciate you sharing today. We will move on to our Q&A. So that will be with Will, with Costa, and we'll also bring some of our internal specialists. So we have Anya, a Senior Program Manager at People Insight, and Kate Pritchard, our Head of Consultancy. So as a first question, we'll go to the chat, where the chat has been quite active. First question for you, Will, if you could just give us a bit of insight around how big your staff is at Enstar, and also how important external benchmarking plays in terms of how you present to leaders, or whether you focus solely on your progression from the previous year's surveys.
Can you just repeat the first part of the question? Was it how big is the team that's working on
how big is how many people do you have at Enstar?
Oh, okay. So we've got 800 people at Enstar. It breaks down roughly into 4 core functions. So we provide reports at the group level for 4 functions and for the about 30 or so key teams. And in terms of our focus, and when we support the production of those reports, if your question was focused on, where are we applying our focus, I think we're all about interpreting what we're seeing in the report and then helping guide them towards what the key insights coming out of the report that would then inform action planning. So I'd say that's HR's role when it comes to the report production, and us providing some additional insights.
Amazing, thank you. And we also had a question, I think it was the first question. Are there any standout questions that you use for the D&I survey that really get to the heart of how inclusive your business is?
We take advice from Costa's team. We try to keep as close to the core set of questions, and just my own personal view is that relative to what I've seen in other organisations, it's very consistent, and that I don't have any issue with any of the core central questions being suggested. We very much partner with Costa and the team to review those and to agree on the latest best practice. But I look to Costa and the team to provide us with that insight, and they've done a great job. Yeah.
And we've done a bit to, of course, validate those questions and make sure they're reliable. Ryan, I'm just going to add the question I think is a standout. There's a lot, but the one I like, I'm going to get the wording wrong now. I should know it, given how many times I've seen it in the survey. But along the lines of people backgrounds like me can make it to the top type of thing. So it's that idea of, look, regardless of, I don't know who I am within the organisation, do I feel it's a type of place where I could get to the top if I wanted to, if I had that ambition? And for me, that says a lot about the type of the culture an organization has and how inclusive it is.
Amazing, thanks for that, Costa. If we jump into some of our pre-arranged questions also, another one for you, Will, is considering how broad the survey strategy is at Enstar as of this year, how frequently do you think your survey should be conducted to get that rhythm right between getting enough feedback so that it's useful, but not creating survey fatigue within the workforce?
Yeah, so we do it once, well, and the results at the moment are pretty good. So we don't feel we need to have a pulse survey. There is an option, we have talked about it, of running a pulse survey at the 6-month point, so in between the annual surveys, but we don't feel we need that at the moment. What we do is we partner with Costa and the team to run focus groups. So focus groups have been used to follow up on key issues that have come out of the survey. Costa, anything else you'd add in terms of best practice that you see on this?
I mean, just on the focus groups, I think you're right. Listening, there's a tool that you can use, but listening doesn't have to just be online. Qualitative listening or getting in front of people is fantastic. And those focus groups, which we, as you know, we send invites to everyone, and it's very open, and whoever wants to join, joins. And the feedback we get from those focus groups are fantastic. We even have repeat customers, if you will, repeat participants who join every year, and they love it. And the feedback that often comes our way is the focus groups themselves demonstrate action as a result of the survey, or that leaders are taking it seriously and listening. So just the focus group, before even we gather further insight, it kind of ticks a couple of boxes already, which is really good. So I'll definitely advise focus groups as an option to complement existing survey platforms.
Amazing, thanks for that, guys. And then the next question, I'd pose this to you, Anya. We have a question around keeping employees on the journey of giving feedback so that they can continue to improve the employee experience. And we got this question in conjunction with some others around how to publicize the survey launch, how to communicate those per-survey actions, as well as potentially avoiding a "you said, we did" approach. So if you can just speak around everything to do with comms, essentially, and how important it is in terms of that journey.
Absolutely. Well, anyone that's worked with me will know that I'm really big on the comms, and for any successful survey or listening program, I think you need to have a really good strategic communications plan in place, and that should loop around everything you do, right from the beginning, thinking about how people are going to, how they're going to access the survey to get those response rates up, as Costa touched on earlier in the slide deck as well, during live and post survey as well. Having a plan in place through all the different phases is so important. But this plan has to also think about all your different audiences, and that can be tricky depending on the size and span of the organisation. I think we've got a wonderful example here at Enstar today where you really thought through to all the different parts, all the different audiences, and given them lots of examples of what you're doing. I know this can get trickier the bigger you are, and how many locations you have and so on. But my advice is always to bring people on the journey, to involve those local managers, local HR teams that you have, bring them on board, get them really excited about it, get them invested, and to involve them and their teams. So to create this kind of culture of we're in it together. And to be really open about everything, like it's been mentioned today as well. If you can't do something, that's fine. You can talk about that. Be authentic. If we can't fix it straight away, that's absolutely fine. But don't be silent on it. I think everybody just wants to feel comfortable when it comes to listening strategy. When it comes to fixing the workplace issues that you might have, it's not expected that it's going to be from one day to the other. So just thinking about those communication channels, and it's going to be different for different parts. So I just say a good plan in place.
Amazing. And on that "you said, we did" piece, is it more so around perhaps that phrase itself being used, but the actual approach that underpins that phrase continuing to keep that alive?
Absolutely. So yes, that approach needs to continue. I think what I've seen recently are lots of quick, shorter examples of actions that have come through, and that's what's going to push your belief in action score anyway. So little videos, little infographics, short, quick, easy, and get local areas to do their own. I think that really goes a long way. People want to see their teams, how it affects their areas. So anything that you can do like that is really helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anya. And then Costa, I'll ask you this next one. In terms of managing action planning across larger, more complex organizations, is there a way that we can suggest best practice without overly complicating the activity and confusing people within what the exact intention of the activity is?
Yeah, so I mean, it does depend on organization as well, Ryan. So I wouldn't say not everyone's in the same boat, but if we just think about those large organizations, complex organizations, then I would say there are a few things from our experience that does help. So, and I've made a note of them. So one is clarity of expectation. What's the goal here? What are we aiming for? Knowing the target and aim is essential. Then a consistency in approach is, we feel, important, and having worked with a couple of organizations actually last month where we're thinking about getting leaders and managers on an action planning call to work them through it, is having a consistent methodology in how we capture action. So we saw that somewhat example from Enstar using the tool and how actions can be captured. It can be as something as simple as maybe following even a SMART methodology, making it specific, making it measurable, making it achievable. What strategic objective is it relevant to? So everyone following that same method does make it easy as someone, let's say from HR or leader, to have that overview and understanding of what's going on. How do we ensure we don't reinvent the wheel here and repeat things and actually learn from each other? The third I made a note of is, I'm a big fan of doing one thing wholeheartedly and properly rather than picking 5 things that you will do half-heartedly and don't really have that impact. You know what? Do one thing that's going to happen and have an impact really well, that's tangible, visible. That will probably knock up your belief in action question much more than doing 5 things that kind of here and there, not that great. So make it achievable and then build the momentum from that. You want an upward spiral with this, not a downward spiral. The next point is a mistake we've often seen in a pitfall where leaders and managers think they should have all the answers, or maybe even HR. And I love what Anya said. I wrote it down. We're in it together type of thinking, where you get people on board. And if I was a manager or leader, it's about, what, this is what the results said. This is what I'm thinking. Team, tell me, do you agree? Does anyone want to get involved? It might be a nice way to delegate a task and also introduce a bit of extra challenge and learning for an individual within the team. But we find that often really helps as well, Ryan. But as I said, everyone is different, but those are some of the common things we've seen that work really well for those larger and more complex organizations.
Amazing. Thanks for that. And then the final question before we wrap, this one will be for you, Kate. This is very specific, but perhaps you can make it a bit more universal. We have a prefer not to answer as an option for all demographic questions in a DEI survey. This group almost always scores the lowest on DEI related questions. What can we learn from this data set?
Thanks, Ryan. Yes, it is quite a commonly asked question, actually. And when we do our surveys, we do ensure that people are not forced to answer questions, the demographic questions, that they don't feel comfortable with it. So prefer not to say is quite a common response option. And we do find, not just for the DEI questions, but for general questions across the survey, this group tends to be the least satisfied, the least favourable, which is always disappointing to see. And it's difficult because we don't know anything about these people. They haven't disclosed any information. But I guess the fact that people are using that option does tell a story in itself. And it's interesting to look at what proportion of people are using that option. That tells us a lot about psychological safety within an organisation. And I think, what we want to get from this is, going back to some of the things that Anya said, the more communications that we can do about this being a confidential and anonymous survey, and really making people feel comfortable completing the survey, and also recognising that if they complete the survey and provide information, it's easier for us to then use that data to drive positive improvements. So getting the messaging right, but obviously creating the environment where people feel safe providing that information is really important. One thing that we sometimes do at People Insight is, rather than specifically having a prefer not to say option, we just allow respondents to skip, because we find that if we don't provide a very specific option, people are more likely to respond to the survey. So that can help us to get more useful information. But it is a challenge, and I would say that the more that you can do to communicate the power of providing feedback and sharing where you are, the fact that we still won't identify individuals, it will just help us to focus action across particular groups.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Kate. That will close our Q&A session. I will hand back to you, Costa, before we wrap. But thanks to everyone who submitted a question.
You're on mute, Costa.
That would just save 30 seconds. Apologies. Thank you very much for everyone joining, is what I was saying. Thanking yourself, Will, for joining and sharing quite a lot of information, insight from what you've seen within Enstar. Ryan for facilitating, Kate and Anya for jumping on board as well. So as we usually do, it's hopefully, not sure if you can see this, but there's an image not appearing for me saying 100 trees are being planted in everyone's name to say thank you very much. And so out there are 100 trees somewhere with your names written on it, figuratively speaking, of course, hopefully not literally speaking. And we're hoping to have you again join us for our next Learn and Share. We've got Ryan on board at People Insight, who's fantastic at getting these up and running and has made my life super easy in actually leading this session as well. So thank you all again, and hope to speak to you or present to you again soon.